And we're live. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where and when you're watching this episode of the Healthcare Thought Leadership LinkedIn Live Show. I'm Marion Spears Carr, and I'm your host for today. So amazingly excited to be talking about this topic. The topic today is do no harm, future-ready leadership and boards are the key to success. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Marion Spears Carr. I'm the founder and managing partner of a company called Inflow Executives. We're an executive search and advisory firm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and Nashville, Tennessee. I live in the mountains of Georgia. And I'm just super incredibly honored to have my guest today, Jay Weiser, the chief catalyst and navigator for Jay Weiser Consulting. Jay and I connected through another mutual contact. And Jay, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background and your work, and then we'll jump right into the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. Well, as Chief Catalyst and Navigator of Jay Weiser Consulting, I guide and enable C-suite leaders and boards of directors to avoid the perils of not being ready for the future. I help them embrace uncertainty and to be positioned to navigate and thrive in the whitewater ahead.
Yeah, and one of the things that attracted me to this conversation is, for those of you who don't know me and those of you who do watch the show on a regular basis, one of my areas of focus is working with boards of directors on CEO searches, CFO searches, senior leader searches for healthcare organizations, both in the hospital traditional market, but also private equity-backed healthcare organizations. And this being future fit. Do we have a leadership team that is future fit, ready for the future, ready for the challenges coming down the pipe? That's a critically important aspect of those organizations who are going to grow and be sustainable and make it. And I think the pandemic taught us a lot about that. Before we get started, I want to shout out to everybody that's watching us live. One of the things I love about this live format on LinkedIn is you letting me know and letting us know where you're watching from. So post in the comments, let us know where you're watching from. If you have questions for Jay as we go through, please post those in the comments as well. We want this to be an interactive conversation. Jay, you and I talked about this idea of why it is so critically important that we have leadership teams that are, as you've already mentioned, future fit. Give us a little bit of background on how you got to that point. Talk to us a little bit about why that's so critical in today's environment. And share with us, particularly with this audience. My audience is primarily healthcare leaders from all over the country and actually now around the world. What are some of the critical things they need to think about from that perspective?
So I think the first thing in terms of, what got me here, even prior to COVID, we were seeing companies across industries continually being surprised, caught off guard, unaware, not being fully aware of their context. They were so focused very often on efficiency. Nobody was thinking further out ahead, what's out there, what may happen. Not that anybody could have predicted COVID, but I gave a talk about 6 weeks before COVID started. And the topic was about being a relevant and valuable leader in the 2020s. And I talked about this idea that we don't get to control our circumstances, what's going on around us. We do get to control how we respond. And this idea of taking agency. So that was 1. 2, when COVID hit, that just amped everything up. It pulled back the covers and people found out how ready or unready they were. People were kind of caught like deers in the headlights. And I remember somebody saying to me, we've never seen anything like this before. And I stepped back and I thought for a minute and I said, well, that's not true. We've had H1N1. Yes, you had, Spanish flu 1919. We had a financial collapse. Obviously, the Great Depression, 2008, 2010. You've been through that before. 9/11, we saw travel and hotels decimated. We've seen some of this before, but we didn't remember any of the lessons. So this idea, when I talk about preparedness and being future fit, people would say, oh, I don't have time for that. Why do I want to prepare for things that might never happen? And, when somebody says that to me, I'm like, well, how's that working for you? Because we're not just dealing with risks in isolation. We're seeing how interconnected risks are. Whether, a pandemic, the economy, a barge gets stuck in the Suez Canal, and the whole world is messed up. Who would have thought that level of interconnection? And when it comes to healthcare, talk about change. That's an industry that has gone through one change after another, for the last couple of decades. And that's just getting faster and faster. Whether it's, patients thinking as consumers, whether it's staffing shortages, whether it's introduction of AI, different delivery models, value-based care, the changes keep on coming. And if we as leaders, one, are not paying attention, two, we're not nimble in terms of how do we adapt, how do we take this information and help our organizations understand it, we're going to be caught flat-footed. And, one of my favorite quotes is, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So we're seeing pockets where, leaders have stepped up. They thought about being future ready. It's not just, how do we do this year? It's to your point around sustainability. We want to be here 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, serving our communities. And we have to meet the community's needs when and where and how they want to be served.
I really think you hit on a whole lot of things we can unpack there. I want to give a big shout out to Karen Bentley's checking in from Charlotte, North Carolina. That's my hometown area where I'm originally from. Brad Reed's checking in from Dallas, Texas. Good to see you, Brad. Cynthia McMasters is checking in here in the Atlanta area. Glad to have you. Zahara is checking in from Karachi, Pakistan. Zahara, glad to have you. And Mihaela is checking in from Romania. I told you this show was international. I didn't realize how international it was going to be today. So that's fantastic. Jay, when you and I were talking about our conversation, one of the things that I told you about was I do a leadership class once a year at Virginia Commonwealth University for their master's program in health administration and their master's of science in health administration. And one of the predictions that I made this last month when I was there, that there were people in these master's programs that 5 years from now are going to be in jobs, be in roles within healthcare that don't even exist today. Like those roles as of right now don't exist. And a lot of that is going to be response to disruption, to changes in the industry, how we have to deliver care, what the market can bear, what consumer patterns, are changing, et cetera. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about things that you see that are coming down the pipe that a future fit leader is going to be prepared to manage.
So a couple of things, when you talk about jobs, people, did not imagine. I remember, and this is going back pre-COVID. I think it was Piedmont Hospital here in Atlanta that had a chief customer officer. And I think his name was Matt Gov. And the thing I remember is hospitals treating people as customers. Wow, what an idea. And that's become so much more important now. I happened to be doing a little bit of research before, and I wanted to search chief customer officer in hospitals, came up showing chief experience officers and listed about 50. I'm like, that's really good. Whether or not we're delivering on that promise is something different. Now, going back to your question about future fitness and future readiness, I think that there are these tensions that leaders have to manage. It can't be, I can do this or I can do that. It can't be, I can do quality, deliver quality care and a great patient experience. It's not either or, you need to do both. And leaders have to balance and navigate those tensions. So an example, I have this model called the Five Leadership Superpowers.
Yeah.
And the superpowers do not replace core leadership skills. You still need those traditional skills, but you have to manage 5 tensions on top of all the stuff you're doing. And the first tension is around being a present futurist, balancing the present, understanding the context you're operating in, knowing where you're going, and paying attention to what's coming down the pike, watching for signals, using that information to help drive decisions. Now, you made the comment, what are some new jobs coming down the pike? Well, if you're paying attention to the future, you're going to see things that are going on in different industries, whether it's around the introduction of different technology and tools, whether it's different partnerships, because your organization is a healthcare system. You can't do everything alone. Are you partnering with device manufacturers who can help you bring things in? Information services. It's that ecosystem and those partnerships that drive results. The second.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I posted in the comments an article that you published on the 5 superpowers, and I want to really jump into that. Just a few more shout outs. Dave McClung, thank you for checking in. Dave is a regular viewer of the Healthcare Thought Leadership LinkedIn Live show. Glad to have you, Dave. Kathy Bailey, one of my favorite executive leaders out of North Carolina, probably my favorite. She was my very first client in 1991 when I first got into leadership search. So she is an amazing client and friend and colleague out there. Elizabeth Solomon checking in from Sandy Springs. Kathleen Ferguson checking in from Hillsborough, North Carolina. Great representation from my home state. Jay, I love typologies, and I think you and I talked about that. I'm certified in a couple different behavioral-based typologies, and my master's degree work was in organizational behavior, and I studied, part of the work that I studied was some of the typologies out there. But I love this idea of the 5 superpowers. Tell us a little bit about those. Tell us how you got to that point, and what are those superpowers in terms of the context of being future fit leaders.
So the first thing, how did I get to that point?
It's interesting.
Having been in strategy execution consulting for several years, what I realized is that companies can be doing all the right things, but there's still something missing when you throw disruption and you throw uncertainty in, and these companies were struggling. And I started to ask myself why. And over the course of about 6 months, I identified these 5 different tensions at various points. The first one was the one I just talked about, being a present futurist. And the key line for people to remember there is context matters. It's context today, and it's context on a rolling basis, thinking about what's happening tomorrow. It's not just, let's do an environmental scan once a year. It's not enough. You have to be doing that on an ongoing basis. The second thing that became very clear with COVID, the first thing people did faced with the crisis is they went back to what they know. And if that didn't work, they did it twice as hard. And some folks even said, well, let's triple that. Instead of saying, okay, I don't, as a leader, know the answer, that vulnerability, but saying we as a team can figure this out. And those leaders, I think it was Satya Nadella from Microsoft, he said, we need to move from know-it-all cultures to learn-it-all cultures. It's about being curious, asking questions, fostering debate. Now, a lot of doctors don't like to be debated, because they're the experts. But when you're thinking about leadership, you have to listen to your folks, invite a diversity of opinion, provide a safe environment, to have those discussions. So experienced learner was number 2.
Okay.
About a couple of months after that was this idea of being a prepared risk taker. And, people boards would say, risk taking, what are you, crazy? This is like the worst thing to do.
Exactly.
But risk taking is a part of business. Risk taking is a part of healthcare. It's about taking calculated risks, placing small bets, having pilots. But if we didn't do these things, we wouldn't have any innovation. We wouldn't have new delivery and service models.
Yeah.
It's about being smart about that. The second thing is being a lot more risk intelligent. So instead of just looking at individual risks in isolation, it's how do these different risks interact? The fact of AI changing delivery models, new technology, cybersecurity, all these things impact one another. And the third thing is this having a better posture of preparedness. And what that means is we're not going to be ready for everything. But we know if there's a crisis or a disruption or a problem, what do employees need? Communications. Do we have a communications plan put together for a variety of different issues? Publix was a client of mine. Publix deals with a lot of hurricanes. Being in the Southeast, they have a playbook.
Yeah, they have. They're them and Ingalls and a couple others have had to deal with it very recently, very recently down here in Georgia.
And they have a playbook, so they know if a storm's coming, this is what we do.
Yep.
Healthcare systems need to do the same thing. And it's not just for medical emergencies. It's, what happens if all of a sudden reimbursement changes or some new innovation comes in that's pulling patients from your system to another system because they deliver more customized care delivery that you can't do. So it's being prepared for those changes. So prepared risk taker is 3. 4 is being a strategic executor. Now, going back to my life, there's always this battle between strategy and execution. You need to have both. They need to be integrally linked. And what I mean by that, you can have a great strategy. If you can't execute it, it's a pipe dream. It's a hallucination. You can have great execution, but if you have no strategy, you're very busy, but you're not going anyplace. So it's tying those two together. The second thing, part of being a strategic executor, especially in this environment, is you can't just say, okay, we're setting strategy in January. We'll come back a year from now, go off to the golf club, and we'll look at it again. No, you have to be looking at it on a continuous basis, and you have to adapt to the circumstances. Now, that doesn't mean you completely got your strategy, but how you implement and execute is different. When conditions change, if what you're doing is no longer relevant, stop it. So it's being able to adjust. And the third part of being a strategic executor is not making short-term decisions that impair long-term performance. We've seen a lot of tech companies, lay off tons of staff. But those are the very people that innovated the products those companies are famous for.
Yeah.
They're going to go someplace else. And you've just lost all that knowledge.
Yep. So, a lot of institutional knowledge is right out the door. Exactly.
Being much more strategic about it. The fifth superpower is being an accountable collaborator. Now, that was the last one I came up with. Accountability has always been a sensitive issue. I've been in organizations where I've had the CEO say, I need to know who to kill if something goes wrong. That does not set up for a cooperative, collaborative relationship. Accountability is a hammer. It's, who do I go after? Instead of recognizing, I talk about strategy being a team sport. Healthcare is a team sport in terms of how it gets delivered. And it's recognizing, to address the challenges we have, healthcare or any other industry, you have to work across functions. You have to work across organizations. You have to work with your ecosystem partners. And it's about having the people on your team having shared goals. It's a mutually beneficial relationship, and they're accountable for delivering the outcomes that are important for your stakeholders. So it's not just about on budget, on time. It's about on benefit. Are you getting the results? Are you getting the outcomes? And is everyone, equally committed? Think about a special forces team. They bring people who are fit for the future, fit for purpose, regardless of rank, regardless of service line. You bring the right people together, you give them a mission, and they go do it. Leaders are not, the general doesn't go on the mission hovering behind the teams like, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? How about this?
Exactly.
You give them the autonomy, you give them the tools, you properly resource. And that's when great things happen, when those teams come together. So
100%. That's 100%. Sorry to interrupt you there. But 100%. We got some great questions. I want to make sure we have time for it.
Please.
Dr. Cole Evanson's checking in. Dr. Evanson just recently took on the leadership of the National Nurses on Board Coalition. He says, great to see you. So glad we are talking about future fit leaders. This is such an important topic as we approach high reliability in healthcare. One of my shows last year was around applying the concept of high reliability organizations into healthcare. Dr. Evanson and I have known each other for a long time, and he's doing great work in that regard. So I think that fits, and it's good timing for that question and that comment. But I want to jump to this question here. So Hara has got a great question from Pakistan. How do we inspire our teams to embrace uncertainty? You were talking about that risk-taking concept and see it as an opportunity rather than a threat. So Hara, thanks for that question. Jay, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think about a couple of things. First of all, it's about providing that psychologically safe environment so you can have those discussions so people are less threatened. The second thing is recognizing what is stable in terms of your purpose, your values, so people have something to grab onto. And three, when it comes to being an experienced learner, an accountable collaborator, it's about that learning and team environment, that if those resources are there, it's an environment where you can learn from doing experiments, from doing different things. Your teammates have your back. Uncertainty doesn't become threatening anymore. And I remember, I'm sure a lot of folks fly on Delta Airlines. Ed Bastian, CEO of Delta, when COVID hit, he went out in big town hall for all Delta employees. He said, we're throwing out the flight plan. So that was their strategic plan. He said, this is new for us too. I've not been through a pandemic either.
Yeah.
But I have confidence that we, the Delta team, can figure this out and how we're going to get through this. And it's a leader who at the same time can be humble and say, I don't have all the answers, I need your help. But I'm confident that we as a team can pull together and address this. And here's how. That allows you to embrace uncertainty.
Love that. And Dave's checking in, and with this question, Dave McClung's checking in with this question. I think of this question a lot because one of the things that I try to tell my clients in the leadership development space or in the world of executive recruiting, working with boards, et cetera, is understanding the impact of leadership development and process for the young leaders. And Jay's got a really good question. Do you consider the 5 superpowers all equally important, or should a young leader focus on 1 to 2 of these to start and attempt the mastery of it? Great question, David. That's really in line with some of the stuff that I do as well. What are your thoughts on that, Jay?
So a couple of things come to mind. Yes, first of all, let's talk about leaders in general, not just young leaders. Different superpowers come into play with different circumstances. So it's having a leadership team with that toolkit. It doesn't mean everyone's an expert in every superpower. Going back to young leaders, I think familiarity with the model and understanding how you have to balance present and future experience and learning, preparedness and risk taking, strategy and execution, accountability and collaboration. They don't teach that in business school. They need to. Business schools teach by function. They don't teach by how do we deliver these outcomes. So I think exposure to those is important. Now, for somebody who's a young leader, maybe first time being a supervisor, having a team, the 2 I would say are most important: experienced learner and accountable collaborator. Those are I think those are really foundational from a culture perspective. That if you have a learning environment, you have a collaborative team environment, that fosters everything else. If you don't have that collaboration and accountability, experience and learning coming into play, it's very hard to do the other superpowers.
Great answer. Karen Bentley's actually checking in. Karen, a great question here. And Karen's a healthcare consultant and a longtime colleague of mine as well. And she goes, have you found that articulating KPIs in the strategic plan and then tying achievement to those KPIs, to performance incentives, to being effective in the strategy execution, how important is that to make sure that that is part of the leadership model? A great question, Karen. I think that's really important. Particularly, we haven't seen a lot of that in the nonprofit world for a long time, and a lot has been changed in that direction.
So I think a couple of things come into play. So first, part of my background, I spent 10 years working with a firm, the founders who had started Balanced Scorecard, David Norden and Bob Kaplan from Harvard. So measurement is important. I think what's important, though, is they've got to be measures that matter. And when I say measures that matter, they're things, if you get this information, you can do something about it. You can act on it. So one, they've got to be actionable. Are they driving the right behavior? If they're not driving the right behavior, you either change what you do or you have to adjust the measure to get the behavior you want. It's also recognizing the measures together tell a story. But there's also, it's not just the numbers. It's the narrative. It's the qualitative information as well. I think it was Einstein, they said, had the quote, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So I think the KPIs are part of that system, along with accountability and collaboration, experience and learning, and those pieces together. It's part of the puzzle. It's not the only part of the puzzle. And it gives you a look into what's happening. I think the other thing I want to point out is it's not just about results. It's about the behaviors that drive results. So measures that can be predictive, can be drivers of performance outcomes.
Yeah, I think that, and I think that's a great place for us to kind of bring this to closure, because we're out of time. I told you these 30-minute conversations go by in about, seems like 15 minutes. Jay, I'm going to post your LinkedIn page link into the chat so people can connect with you. last question for this group. We have this amazing group of leaders that show up for these shows. Thank you. For those of you who aren't connected with me on LinkedIn, a lot of you accept the invitations. Please send me a connect request. Let's get our networks connected. Thank you for doing that. If you want to learn more about what we do at Inflow, that would be awesome. Jay, I'm going to put your link in the chat. But Jay, final thoughts here. What's one thing leaders can do right now, today, to start their future fit journey? What's the one thing that they could do today to lead them in that direction?
I think it's just having that conversation around what future fitness is, why it's important. You don't want to be surprised. You don't want to be caught off guard. You see what goes wrong when you're not ready. I'll make a little plug. I have a future readiness assessment called Are You a Future Ready Leader? So if anybody messages me or emails me, connects with me on LinkedIn, I can provide a link. And what it is, it's 15 statements, 15 questions, multiple choice. You give you answers. Instantly, you get results that show, one, overall future readiness, and of the 5 superpowers, how do you rate? With advice on what you can do next, because I think it's about building the skills, learning how to apply them, and it shifts the discussion and it makes the improbable possible, and that's what we all want.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes the improbable possible. I love that. We have another question in the chat. Jay will come, Zahara. Jay will come and send that answer to you because we're out of time. Thank you for watching. For those of you who are joining me for the first time, thank you for watching the Healthcare Thought Leadership LinkedIn Live show. If you have ideas and would like to be on the show, want to talk about your work or talk about a problem you solve in the healthcare world, please send me a message. I'd like to have you. For those of you who regularly watch my show, thank you for being here. We will close. Have a great Tuesday afternoon. Jay, thank you so much for being a part of today's conversation. I'm Marion Spears-Carr, and this is the Healthcare Thought Leadership LinkedIn Live show. Have a great day.